Okay, good afternoon, everyone, to our April Mopag monthly meeting. This meeting will be recorded and posted to mopag.net. Going to have a shorter meeting today, about 90 minutes as planned. But we should have plenty of time for discussion. We didn't have a lot of that last month. And maybe we can discuss Tuesday's elections, ballot measures, Biden legislation, your activities, or whatever you want to. So we'll have the treasurer report, do the minutes, any announcements that you all want to make, and then that will be followed by our two speakers for today. So Christina, can you give a treasurer's report, please?
Yes, we have $431.75 in the bank account. There was no activity this last month, and there is a membership payment being sent to the PO box. It might be there, it just haven't made it to the bank yet.
Thank
I
you.
apologize. I meant to check the post office box this morning.
Do you have a handle on how many members we have now?
I do not know. I need to work on that.
Okay. Okay, next up, the minutes. The minutes have been sent out to our Google groups. And can I have a motion to approve? Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Thank you, Marty, for doing up the minutes. Appreciate that. Okay, let's go to announcements. So, the announcements that people would like to make today.
I have two quick ones.
Okay.
One is hopefully people have received emails from Scott Sifton on his sort of a kickoff, low key, because as Steve reminded me, the election's not for like a year and a half. So he's been doing phone calls and stuff out of his house. Eventually he'll have I guess since it's statewide campaign, he'll have several offices. But what he's doing is kind of recruiting supporters and people that can volunteer to help in his campaign. And also, I hope Glenn got the email from Deb Lavender about the state budget and the Republicans refusing to expand Medicaid, saying that it was going to cost too much, where the state has like $1.8 billion in reserve. And it's going to cost, if I remember the figure right from Deb's thing, it was going to cost them about $100 million or something.
We're not going to get into a discussion of the budget right now.
Oh, I thought that's what Glenn was going to talk about. Was
yeah, later on we will. Yeah. So, any other announcements from folks? Well, I have at least one. A former guest speaker to Mopag has died. You might have seen it in the Post-Dispatch. Bill Haas died at 76 while he was swimming. And I knew him because he used to show up at swim meets that I went to. He was a good swimmer. That's that.
Is he the guy that was on the school board?
He is the guy who was on the school board and has run for everything.
Yeah.
Including president.
He's currently on the ballot in the city of St. Louis for Tuesday's school board election.
Oh.
I want to make you all aware also that West County Dems on April 12th, they're going to have Professor Kimball from UMSL.
Oh.
And he's going to be talking about current election issues in Missouri and the United States. So you might want to zoom in on that on April 12th. And I imagine you go to their website if you didn't get there. I posted it to our, again, our Google Groups email, if you have trouble finding that. Yeah,
Do they tape their meetings?
Glenn's nodding his head yes.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We have the capacity, and I thought they started in January recording the Zoom meetings.
What I'm asking is because I have a conflict with their meetings, so I can't attend them.
Mhm.
I'm at another one. So if they do tape their meetings, I'd like to know, because then I can at least afterwards listen to the tape.
I'll ask our tech guy. It shouldn't be a problem for us to do that and put it on the website. We have plenty of space on the website.
Yeah, I'll go to West County Dems later and see if they're doing that or not.
They are, let me know.
I'll presume that that's where they would post that. Okay, today, Gretchen Barwick from Eastern Missouri Sierra Club
It's actually
is going to speak. And Rick, you want to say a couple things?
She's actually staff for the chapter, I believe, and she is now the executive director. Is that what you're called for this state chapter? What I had for a little bit of background, because I knew she had been there for a while. She graduated from WashU Sociology School and with a master's, and has been in St. Louis for 20 years. And I know she hasn't worked for Sierra Club that long, but she was originally, I think, on the Sierra Club coal campaign that's been trying to change government policy so we're not subsidizing coal for power plants and things like that, reducing fossil fuel. And like I said, she's now the chapter director, and she's filling in for Ashton because Ashton didn't really, and neither did I when I was talking to her for a couple of weeks. Tomorrow it's Easter, so if anybody's deeply religious, I'm sorry about that. But I had never thought about that this was Easter weekend when we set up the meeting date. So she's with her family that lives up in Jerseyville, Illinois, which is somewhere north of Pierre Marquette Park, kind of along the river somewhere. And I never quite got distances. And I think it was going to be too hard for her to talk or join this meeting today. I have no idea what kind of internet connection.
All right, thank you, Rick, for arranging this. And I believe Gretchen stepped in to replace John Hickey. Is that right?
Yes, she was interim director for half a year or something, and I guess the state committee finally appointed her the chapter director. So she's the person that runs the staff, manages the office that they have at Maplewood, and but she works under a statewide committee that's member based. So
okay, well, let's turn it over to Gretchen then.
Hi,
Yeah,
everybody.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. Like Rick and Steve said, my name is Gretchen Waddell Barwick. I like to keep it really confusing and have two last names. I am the chapter director here for the Missouri Sierra Club. And like Rick said, I've lived in St. Louis for more than 20 years. But I've lived in Missouri my entire life, except for 3 very sad years when I lived in Wichita, Kansas with my parents. But we're all back in Missouri, and basically my entire family lives here. So I'm really excited to be running the Missouri Sierra Club right now. I stepped up as interim director, but before that, I was the assistant chapter director. And before that, I was an organizer. Like Rick said, I worked predominantly on clean energy issues. And you may know me from my work in building codes. And I also did a lot of work in Kansas City. So that's me. I also am a terrible gardener. And I like crafts that people would have enjoyed in the 1800s, quilting, knitting, cross stitch, reading books, and spending a lot of time with my husband and daughter. So that's who I am. And I'm really glad to be here with you all. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, but I just wanna make sure everyone has access. I've put in the chat a PDF of today's presentation, so feel free to share. And there are links in there that you can click on to get to the information. And this way you don't have to scribble something furiously. I've also included my email address and our office number. My email address is incredibly long, so please don't try to write it down. You'll probably get it wrong. And I've included our office phone number as well. I will let you know our offices nationwide are closed right now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We haven't been in offices since March. However, we do check our messages at least a couple of times a week. And so it may take a little longer to get back to you if you call us. Email's probably faster, but you're welcome to call our office number and leave a message anytime and we'll get back to you pretty quickly.
Gretchen, how do we have to do something to get the PowerPoint stuff that you said you posted?
It's in the chat. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there
it's
should
the
be a little something that looks like a call out
okay,
box.
now I see it.
Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you don't have to pull that up now.
No,
But it will look like this when you pull it up. All right. And if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me because I'm sharing my screen. I can't see your faces or the chat. So feel free to interrupt or you can wait till the end, whichever works. I'm talking to you all today about the Thrive Agenda. You may know the name Thrive Agenda, you may not, but I bet you're all familiar with the Green New Deal. The Thrive Agenda is the bigger, better Green New Deal. And we are really trying to encourage the Biden administration to go big and bold with this because, as you all know, Biden is in his first 100 days of his presidency. And this is where we are able to get a lot of traction going before things start to fizzle off and people forget that they're supposed to be working together. We also just want to recognize that we may be able to have huge victories in the next 6 months, but this is a really difficult time for a lot of folks. We're sort of going through a nationwide trauma together. We're just moving past an election that some folks in the GOP tried to overthrow, an attempted insurrection. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. I'm so glad that folks are getting vaccines, but we still are not past this. We have seen unprecedented levels of unemployment and financial hardship. And on top of all of that, there are folks in our country that are trying to remove our access to democracy. There is massive racism and huge issues and violence that's happening against people of color. And on top of all of this, we still have a really small minimum wage that is a poverty wage and all the other social injustices that are happening in our country that we should have fixed 20 years ago. And so we're just seeing a lot of change in our country, but there are also huge victories within reach. And so recognizing all of that, we're just trying to stick in there and do everything that we can to see some much needed change in our country after an incredibly difficult 4 years. So we are part of the Green New Deal Network, which includes tons of organizations. And you can see from this that it includes labor organizations, it includes frontline organizations, including Black and Indigenous organizations, folks who are representing people who are refugees or who are coming into our country. and just several other progressive organizations. And we're proud to be part of that group. I'm not going to show this, but I encourage folks to click on the link in this or just look it up on your own. But this is a really great video from the Green New Deal Network about why the Thrive movement is important. So what is the Thrive agenda? It includes 100% clean energy by 2035, which is a really ambitious goal, but something that we desperately need to stop, or at least to slow down the impacts of climate change on our country and on our world. A guarantee wage and benefit replacement for workers and communities impacted by economic transitions. This is a huge issue right now. If we want to transition to a clean energy economy, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the folks that are impacted by fossil fuels. So that includes people who are currently working in coal-fired power plants, people who are in the mining industry, people who work on natural gas pipelines, people who are working on other infrastructure issues, and folks who are currently working in fossil fuel industries, including the utilities and things like that. So we need to be conscious that those folks, if we transition to clean energy, will likely need new jobs. So we need to make sure that they have training, that we're not leaving communities devastated by the fossil fuel industry. So for example, we stop mining for coal, we need to do something for those workers and something for those communities. I think a lot of us have heard about what's happened in, for example, Appalachia, when huge fossil fuel industries just pull out of communities and leave people with no transition, no severance, and a huge mess to clean up in their community and huge amounts of illness and poverty. It's really devastating to these communities, and we need to make sure that we don't let that happen this time. It's also 50% of the investment and benefits go to frontline communities. This is something that has never been an agenda like this before and is truly revolutionary. When we have large economic bills that pass through the US Capitol, going all the way back and before, Green New Deal, the original, most of the jobs and most of the benefits go to typically white communities and upper middle class. And we saw this under Trump with the huge tax benefits for the ultra wealthy. We did not see that trickle down, which is an absolute myth. Instead, we saw the rich getting richer and the poor and middle class losing their jobs, losing their wealth, and just widening this gap that we have. So in an attempt to stop that and to recognize the harm historically that has happened to frontline communities, low-income Black and Brown communities, and Indigenous communities, we want to make sure that 50% of this investment goes to those communities, and so that we can start to close that gap between people of color, BIPOC, people of color, and white communities. An investment in public health, schools, care work, postal service. This is massive. This is something that we just need as an investment in our economy. And at the Sierra Club, we know that these issues are, and these parts of our community are integral to being able to move to a clean energy economy. If people can't afford solar, if people can't do the things they need to do to live their basic lives, they're not going to be able to take care of our planet. So we need investment into our schools, into our healthcare, into those people who have been disenfranchised in the past, and fix some of the mistakes that happened under the Trump administration. We want to heal nation-to-nation relationships with Indigenous peoples. Some folks may not know this, but every treaty that has been written and signed by the US government with Indigenous nations has been violated. We need to start building back trust and community with the people who held this country before we even came here. Investment in clean water infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, transportation, and clean and safe buildings. I don't know if folks remember what it was like to, be in your first apartment or, when you were first starting out, but I remember it, and our interns will sometimes come in here and talk to me. I remember I had an intern come in and she was just so upset because it was her first apartment. She was in college, and her rent was something like $600 a month. This was several years ago, but that was still a lot of money. And in July, it was really hot, and she got an electricity bill for over $400 because her apartment building had absolutely no energy efficiency, nothing to protect her, and there was no way that she was going to be able to pay that, and she was just panicking. So we talked through it about things that she could do and things she could share with her landlord so that they could make improvements so people didn't get surprise bills like this. But it shouldn't be her job to do that or to know how to introduce her landlord to those issues. This is something that we should be investing in as a community to protect people. Also, energy efficiency standards help us burn less fossil fuels and help us make an impact on the planet, because buildings take up 40% of our electricity use in this country, and in Missouri it's a little bit higher. So this is a huge transition. Also, we need about $110 billion worth of clean water infrastructure in this country. And Biden has recently introduced the People's Jobs Act, I think it's called. And that includes $111 billion in water infrastructure that would be grants, and it would be like direct, low interest loans to cities, communities, and municipalities that need to make infrastructure. It includes several $billion worth of making sure that we no longer have lead in our pipes, which is a huge environmental justice and racism issue. And sustainable agriculture is a huge issue here in Missouri. The soil that we're using, the plants that we're planting have caused our state to go from one extreme to the next. In Missouri, we can have concurrent drought and flood conditions because of the soil and the plants and what we're doing to our floodplains and the development there, and our agriculture. So then there's rebuilding the public sector and reinventing government's ability to get the job done. And so that means protecting workers, it means protecting healthcare, it means working to make sure that the government is actually benefiting people and not just major donors and billionaires. So there are 8 pillars. The Thrive Agenda is huge, but there are 8 pillars that we went around. Number 1, creating millions of good, safe jobs with access to unions, building the power of workers to fight inequality and inequity, investing in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, strengthening and healing nation-to-nation relationships with sovereign Native nations, combating environmental injustice, ensuring healthy lives, averting climate and environmental catastrophe, ensuring fairness for workers and communities, and reinvesting in public institutions that enable workers and communities to thrive. And what all of this was based on, you may have heard about the Build Back Better report. We made the recommendations for the Thrive Agenda, and the Biden administration has supported them because of this report. And I have a link later if you'd like to look at it. It has a link to the full report and just sort of the executive summary, but there's also a website where you can learn more information. The Build Back Better report is an economic renewal plan that invests $1 trillion per year for a decade. And what it would do is it would create 15 million jobs to end the unemployment crisis. If folks are unaware, in 2020, unemployment skyrocketed. The unemployment numbers basically were 13% was the unemployment. It was where unemployment was, but some numbers thought it was as high as 20%. Even if you take sort of a median of that, say 16%, that means 1 in 6 people can't find work that they're looking for. And it's possible that that could have been higher. That's because it doesn't include people who dropped out of the workforce because they couldn't find something, which was 6 million in 2020 and 7 million in 2021. And it doesn't include people who aren't looking because they work part-time, because they couldn't find a full-time job.
I'd like a burrito with.
Excuse me, Al Gerber, I think you need to mute. Somebody needs to mute.
Burrito supreme with
Al? Okay. Go ahead. Sorry, Gretchen.
No problem. So there's a huge unemployment and underemployment crisis in our country right now. And people are really suffering from the fallout from that. And so this Build Back Better report would help us accomplish that goal. It also would cut climate pollution nearly in half by 2030, which is, again, a very ambitious goal, but something we desperately needed to do 5 years ago. It also addresses racial, economic, and gender environmental justice. And this is just like our basic on what it does.
Can I ask you, Gretchen, before you
Yeah.
go on, to make sure I'm clear on something? So you had Build Back Better at the top of that screen. But the numbers you're giving is $1 trillion per year for a decade. Is that Build Back Better or Thrive?
It's both. So the Thrive agenda is what is built on the Build Back Better report and the research that's found in there.
Does the Thrive agenda then it would be $1 trillion per year for a decade?
Actually, a little bit more
Okay.
because of the other things that are included, but this is the economic impact that's included in the Thrive agenda. So our key window of opportunity is the first 100 days of Biden's administration, which basically ends at the end of this month. What's really key is that this week, your senators and representatives are on their break, their spring break, which means they're back in our communities and we want them to hear from you. So what can we do? Only one person who is in our congressional and Senate delegation has signed on as a co-sponsor for the Thrive agenda. It is Representative Cleaver up in Kansas City has signed on as a co-sponsor. And your senators and representatives may need to hear from you that you want them to support this. One of the key people that you can see here that hasn't signed on who might is Cori Bush. So I know I've personally written to Cori and asked her to sign on to this. And I ask all of you too as well who are in her district. Even if you're not in your district, you can reach out to her. But reach out to whoever your representative is or whoever, and both of our senators, because they need to hear from you that people of Missouri want this. There is absolutely nothing worse than walking into a meeting with an elected official and they say, I've heard from nobody in my district that wants this. Even if they don't sign on, even if they vote the wrong way, they need to hear from you that they're doing something that you don't want them to, that you oppose their stance on this. And right now, the best thing to do is to ask them to co-sponsor or support. You can do that by calling. This is the congressional switchboard number. Just ask for your state representative or your senator. You can also, there's an opportunity under Thrive Action here to tweet or write your representatives and senators. And you can learn more at our Sierra Club websites on both of these, the Thrive Agenda and the Build Back Better report. And again, you have this in the PDF. If you just click on these links, they'll take you directly to those websites. And I don't know how much time we have, and I've shared all this with you, but if you don't want to call the congressional main line, you can text Thrive to 69866 and follow the prompts. And they will call your representatives and senators if you type in one of those words. We've also shared a sample script with you if you would like to have one, but make it your own. Other things that we're asking you to do is post on their social media. Go to their page, see what they have written about, and then comment or send a direct message asking them to sign on to the Thrive Act. The key here is we want you to share not sort of a generic message, but we want you to share why you think this is important to our community. How is this going to impact you directly? So, you can include a link to like what the Thrive Act is, but we want you to make it personal. We want you to say, my name is Gretchen Waddell Barwick. I'm with the Missouri Sierra Club, and I am the director of an organization here in Missouri. And I think that the Thrive Agenda is urgently needed because I have a 4-year-old daughter and I want her to be able to do things that I did when I was a child, play outside in, nice clean air. I want her to be able to walk through streams when we're on hikes and play in the woods and not have to worry about massive amounts of ticks that are coming into our state because of climate change. I want her to be able to not worry about getting harmed by water because someone has dumped something in there. I need to know that she's going to have a world that she grows up in where she can continue on living and thriving and loving whoever she wants. So whatever your personal story is, we want you to be specific and speak from the heart, because that is far more impactful than just sharing a bunch of statistics. And then we have sort of a how to write a letter to the editor. I'm sure that folks on this call are very familiar with how to write a letter to the editor. But if you write a letter to the editor, please feel free to email it to me. We'll share it on our Facebook page so that more people go to the to your paper and read it. And we have some tips on writing a letter to the editor here. Again, write what you know through your own experience. Keep it local. How is your community impacted by racial and economic justice, climate crisis, lack of resources, and mass unemployment? And try to keep the tone civil if we can. And then this is my information. If you'd ever like to reach out and talk, or if you have a question or something you want to share with me, that's my personal email address. And this is our general email address. If you can't remember my name, it's just missouri.chapter@sierraclub.org. Questions, comments, concerns? I went through that a little fast.
I have a lot of questions, but anyone wants to go before I go?
I have a question, which I always ask all these groups that say, call your congressman and senator. To me, it's a waste of time to call Ann Wagner, treasonous Hawley, and Blunt, who may listen to you, but all I ever get back is like a canned letter saying, your thoughts are important to us. Don't bother me unless you send a big check, basically. So how do you feel as somebody that's trying to activate or motivate people to contact the horrible people that we have in elected office because our system is so corrupt? Do you think it's worthwhile calling like Ann Wagner?
I do. And like I said before, the worst thing that can happen is if we walk into somebody's office and we have none of their constituents that have spoken to them about this or said that they want something. But if I can walk into someone's office, or our DC folks who are working on lobbying at this can walk into Ann Wagner's office and be like, we know that 54 of your constituents have reached out to you about this. It's actually something they pay attention to, especially when something big is company. They will actually keep little note cards on their desk that say the name of the act, and they'll have a list, just a check mark. This person's for it, this person's against it, of how many of their constituents want them to do something.
Thank you.
I will say it's more impactful if you want to write a personalized letter. Handwritten letters get read. But we recognize that that is a huge time investment. And you may not have that. So if all you have time to do is call, or write a comment, or write something like in a letter to the editor, that's really impactful too. Because you want to remember that, you're calling their office and you're doing a service by telling them, I want X. And you're doing the lobbyists who are working for the Sierra Club and other people who are trying to make a difference. It's a show of power that you're opposing something that your constituents really want. Because remember, what Ann Wagner wants is to stay in office. And Ann Wagner already pissed off a lot of her constituents, pardon my French, by voting again, or not saying that the election was stolen. And she's now frustrating people because she's going directly with the Republican Party line, which unfortunately has been deeply politicized and says that climate change isn't real. And even if it is, there's nothing we can do about it. And it's going to be too expensive, blah, blah, blah.
Too expensive mostly, yeah.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous, and they know it's a lie. But she is trying to stay in office, and she's going to be real concerned if she starts to lose this many votes of people who want something like economic stability. So I would say, even if they don't sign on, even if they end up not voting that way, I encourage you to call anyway.
Can I say something about that? Because I've kind of changed some myself. I mean, it's a personal preference thing. I think how much time you're going to put into writing your elected official. And even though you know that this elected official is not going to vote the way you want, I do think it's important that they get input. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to spend all my time doing this, because I think there are many other things that need to be done. But for the issues that I'm really concerned in, I try and give them my views on it, and ask them to vote the way I want. So I think it's important they hear from their constituents. Absolutely.
And I was infuriated when Josh Hawley said that he was voting the way he was regarding the election because it was what his constituents wanted. So I deliberately wrote him a letter and said, I am your constituent and I disagree with what you're doing regarding overturning the election.
I did the same thing, Susan, and I was so angry that I called his office and I said, I'm going to work my butt off for the next 2 years to make sure that you are never elected again. I don't know if it's gonna work, but I was so angry.
That, regardless of what they decide to do, they have to hear from us, and they have to know that there are people on the other side that they also represent.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Several years ago, before Ameren took over all of Illinois Power, they had a program to get people, they gave people money to unplug the refrigerator in the garage, because they said each of those old refrigerators was using like 3 times as much energy as a new refrigerator. And even if you want a refrigerator in your garage, put a new one out there. I was reading in a business publication where an awful lot of businesses, especially big box stores, can convert to lighting that uses 1/5 the energy they're using now and be just as bright. Is there going to be a big push for energy efficiency? Because if you can save a megawatt by making us all have better light or more efficient lighting, then you don't need to burn the coal. It makes it easier to reach those goals if we're buying the better refrigerators, if we're using the better lighting.
Yeah, there is. And, I think that it's really important to note that energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way that we can stop burning fossil fuels. And I know Ameren had, I don't know if it's still active or not, but for a while there, they had, if you did your own walkthrough energy efficiency audit and sent it to them, they would mail you $50. Which is fantastic.
The last couple of years, they've been using their energy savings dollars by subsidizing LED light bulbs at big box stores, which kind of bothers me because a lot of low-income people can't afford to go in the big box store and buy 6 LED light bulbs at one time.
Exactly. And for a while, the utilities throughout the state, Evergy and Ameren, were actually giving away or significantly reducing the cost of more energy efficient lighting, which helped. There are some things like, I know in my own home, do I need to replace my water heater? Yes. Is that a financial priority right now? No. I got a kid, she's expensive. So, you have to think about that piece. But I'll also say, when we moved into our house, we replaced all of the light bulbs with LED, and our utility bill went down 4% immediately. And so if it is an investment you can make, that's great. But there are also, for low-income families, there are really great programs. Weatherization programs will pay up to $5,000, I think, in energy efficiency upgrades, including things like, replacing, putting new insulation in walls, replacing windows, Anything that like you might need up to $5,000, they'll pay for free. You don't get taxed on it, nothing. And if you're renting and your landlord permits them to do that, they can also do it in a rented home or apartment. So there are programs that are available. We would like to see those expanded. But
Publicize.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know Ameren had that. I know the.
That's actually
reimbursement-
not an Ameren program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that is a federal program. And it's usually run through like local community action agencies. And I'll just type, it's called weatherization. And it's through the LIHEAP program, which stands for Low Income Heating Energy Assistance Program, I think, which helps people pay their utility bills if they can't afford them.
Yeah.
Gretchen, I had a couple other things. First of all, I was on a Zoom call with Betsy Fogel. She's the only Democrat to flip a district to 135th in the Springfield area. And she credited, at least in part, Sierra Club support in her victory. So you may have well been already aware of that or had been working on that, right?
Yeah, we actually had, we haven't been allowed to have any in-person meetings, but in their free time, we had 2 Sierra Club staff members and some board members actually take Betsy hiking. And really, it was like a pure like John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt moment where they took her hiking and they helped her write her entire environmental justice section on her campaign website. And she's been a great vote for us. And she's just really a really like special person. And we donated to her campaign. We walked and canvassed and knocked doors and made phone calls and postcards and all that. And she's fantastic.
I really liked your charts on publicizing and contacting representatives. How can I get a hold of those? Is there a place I can go to or send them to me or something?
I can send them to you. Just let me know what you want. They're also, if from the presentation today, they're in that PDF that I put in the chat earlier.
Oh, they're in the PDF? Okay, thank you.
I see Don and Ross.
Okay, Don?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great presentation, and thank you for all the work you do at the grassroots level. I do have a concern though when we, create an acronym and have these huge numbers that we put throw out there, that we aren't opening ourselves up to easy attack by 8 out of the 10 people that represent us in Washington, and it falls prey to the disinformation machine that the Republicans have cultivated very successfully over the last 40, 50 years. And so I think I think, and one of your last points there is you worked with this candidate on her platform and help from a grassroots standpoint. I think we've got a lot of work to do at the grassroots level in order to really be a threat come election day that these Republicans will fear. And right now, they rely on disinformation and huge amounts of dark money to stay in power, and that we have to be more strategic, I think, in how we attack that.
I completely agree. And for me, with the the Thrive Act and coming up with this acronym and like these huge numbers, it's no matter what we do, we're going to open ourselves up to attack. I mean, so many people watch Fox News, or it's on, whenever I go to the bank, Fox News is on the damn screen. And it's really insidious, this misinformation machine. But some things that we know, Republicans haven't won an election for president in 20 years? They have won through the Electoral College, but they've never won the popular vote. And we know that the majority of people in the United States do not agree with the Republican agenda. We know that Republicans are scrambling in Missouri, in every state in the nation, and through the RNC nationally to try to disenfranchise voters because they don't want to change their agenda. They want to make it harder for people to vote, especially BIPOC communities. And if folks aren't familiar with that, it's Black Indigenous people of color. It's BIPOC. So to be frank, I kind of feel like I don't know if anybody like used to watch like Parks and Rec. I feel a little bit like Leslie Knope, that like people yelling are just people caring loudly. And if people are criticizing me for the work that I'm doing, I kind of feel like I'm doing an okay job, especially some folks who are lying. And we've frankly in Missouri seen this for a long time. We know that if we include racist dog whistles in advertising and in legislation, it's far more likely to pass. We know that we have some really insidious racism here in Missouri that's been impacting our elections for decades. And so I agree with you. We do need grassroots work. At the Sierra Club, one thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to become a more equitable and inclusive organization so that we can broaden our base and work with a lot more people. And so that we can start to build that power. We work with a statewide coalition already to work on some democracy issues. And we recently helped pass Medicaid expansion, which I know you all are going to be talking about later, and the shenanigans that are happening in the Missouri legislature to overturn the will of the people yet again. And we also worked on the No on 3 campaign, and we actually helped gather signatures originally for the Clean Missouri Act. So we work with a large coalition of folks that are actually making a difference here in Missouri. Unfortunately, the Missouri GOP is very good at those racist dog whistles and sharing information that is really inaccurate and lies. So we are working on grassroots organizing. We have Sierra Club members now in every county in the state. And so we're trying to organize those folks to talk to the people they know and to make a difference in their communities. And it's just something we all need to chip in with. Russ.
Thanks, Gretchen. Great, well-organized, very clear presentation, as you always do. I had a question about the use of the term frontline. Does that come from the idea of people who are most exposed to pollution and heavy industrialization? And I noticed that I think in referring to that, there was a statement about Black, Brown, indigenous communities. And it occurred to me, well, maybe it should be expanded to say low income, rural whites, so that those people would also feel included.
So yeah, frontline communities refers to folks who are hit first and worst. And historical data has shows the NAACP actually has a really great report on this called Cold-Blooded, where they show that you are 70% more likely to live within 3 miles of a coal-fired power plant if you are Black or brown. And nationally, we see that you are far more at risk of the impacts of climate change, especially the public health impacts of climate change, if you are Black or brown, or if you are low income. And you're far more likely to be severely low income if you are Black and brown because of systemic racism in our country. So I understand wanting people to feel included, but we want to be really thoughtful about who is actually impacted. And it tends to be Black and brown communities in our state and in our nation. So that's why we sort of kept it there, because we wanted to go along with what the data shows. That being said, there is a huge issue in rural Missouri with loss of jobs, loss of economic opportunities, and some very, very serious environmental concerns, primarily from CAFOs dumping and other things like that. So, you know, we do want to continue to work with those communities, and we do want to find ways that we can work together. Unfortunately, in Missouri, rural communities tend to be more read. They tend to buy into some of that misinformation that we've been talking about. And that's not everyone. Obviously, my husband's family is from Poplar Bluff, and we know some great people that live in Poplar Bluff. People who disagree with us as well. And they're great people too. But it's building up those relationships. It's been really hard. And unfortunately, our country is very divided right now. And it's going to take a long time for us to build back some of that trust with each other. And while I'm here, I do want to give a shout out to Ross, who is our chapter political chair. And he does a great job of looking through candidates that are running for office and helping us make decisions on who we should endorse. And so he put some time and work into that Betsy Fogel campaign as well. And he's just a great ally in our community.
Thank you, Gretchen.
You look like one of the colonialists with your hair, Ross.
I dig it.
Mine won't grow that long. So, Gretchen, have you talked with people in the Rural Crisis Center in Columbia or wherever they are? Because there are some rural groups, and I don't know, I've never heard them talking too much about Sierra Club. I know that Jobs with Justice is working with you. So I'm glad that you're networking with them. And I know that there are people down in Poplar Bluff area that have been fighting, it's gerrymandered, so it's so damn hard to get rid of the Republicans in Congress down there. But it's the area that has the highest poverty rate in the state, and they still vote for Republicans.
They don't see the connection.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting article in the Poplar Bluff newspaper. It's called the Republican or something. But the American Republic, I think is what it is. Anyway, their local newspaper did this really great article where they talked about how so many people had lost jobs because it was so expensive to get steel when Trump put embargoes on China and huge tariffs, and people were losing jobs at the local nail factory. And when the reporters tried to make the connection between Trump's actions and the loss of jobs that they were seeing and the loss of income, they absolutely refused to believe it. And when people have ingrained beliefs like this, like these people have essentially been targeted for propaganda. They have received so much propaganda over so many decades that it's really hard to break that. And there's a lot of research that shows psychologically that if someone challenges your beliefs, you actually dig in harder. So this is not something that we can have a logical conversation about. It's something where we have to find where we have shared values and we have to build relationships with one another, which is harder and takes a lot more time.
Maybe Don would have some suggestions on that because he's networked more with Republicans and stuff than most of us. And but you're right. The problem is people are so brainwashed with Fox and all that stuff, and then anybody that challenges it is some kind of treasonous person or something. So it's a psychology thing, and we need to talk to some psychologists.
But I'll
John?
also mention that
social work, so I don't know how much overlap that was.
yeah, I have my master's in social work, and I found that it's been very helpful in this job. But I'll also just mention one of the first parts of your questions was, do we work with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center? And the answer is yes. We work very closely with Brian Smith, different Brian. Brian Smith at the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and we work with them quite a bit. We've turned people out to their events. We also lobby together a lot in the Capitol. And they have helped us inform our CAFO policies and a lot of the work that we do in the Capitol. We are one of the only environmental organizations in the state that has 2 paid lobbyists in Jefferson City. One contract, and one is our political director, Michael Berg, who goes up to Jefferson City in normal times about once a week. We also have a full legislative committee. And so we have multiple people who live in Jefferson City and Columbia that will go and testify for us if we can't make it up for some reason as staff. And they're fantastic. But yeah, we work very closely with them. And we actually work with them on 2 tables both with our CAFOs and also on that statewide table that works on democracy issues.
Good.
Don, go ahead.
Yeah, so, yeah, and thank you, Rick. I think there are a lot of things we can be doing that we're not doing to meet people where they are in these rural communities, because they can, they control our politics. And it's about, meeting them and giving them solutions to the problems they're facing. Now, easy to say, hard to do, but, and I bring this up over and over again, but broadband for every household, including rural America. And I appreciate this because my family used to be in the phone business, and I know what it means to bury cable all over this country. Okay. People say it's too expensive. Well, it's all relative. And you can't have healthcare in today's world without a broadband connection, okay, to every household. That's something I think we could get everybody to agree on, and it then opens up opportunities. And that's just one example of ways that we can begin to facilitate the rebuilding of our communities and a sense of community and some logic to our politics.
Yeah, I agree. And, it is easy to say it's hard to do, and but it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And I think that also, it's really important to get internet to a lot of different communities. I agree. It's sort of a top priority for our country because so much happens online now. Even school, schools are sending kids home with laptops and tablets so that they can accomplish their work. And it's a modern world, and we require some of that access. But I also want to recognize that, we are tracked in everything that we do, and our media keeps us in bubbles. If you and I Googled the same thing right now, I guarantee you we would get different top results because everything's listening to us, right? And what gets shared on your Facebook and the ads that you get, all those things are wildly different. I'm always surprised when I see like an NRA ad on my YouTube or on my Facebook. So I'm like, isn't Zuckerberg listening to everything I say?
But that's all the more reason why precinct by precinct and township by township, we have to have personal relationships with the people that live in those neighborhoods and the people that represent them. And Ella Jones in Ferguson is a good example of that. She ran positive and she won because she established trust in that community up there.
Yeah, I agree.
Of the aisle. So, yeah.
And unfortunately, Sierra Club isn't exactly a trusted messenger in a lot of these communities, which means the partnerships that we make and the people that we talk to are just doubly important. I mean, when Holly was, complaining about people calling for him to resign or be removed from the Senate, one of the groups that he specifically requested is as being investigated in these pushes was Sierra Club. And he wanted everybody who has a connection with the Sierra Club in the House of Representatives and the Senate to be investigated along with him. And, we get shout outs, unfortunately, on the floor of the House quite a bit. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. So we have to be thoughtful about who we're working with. And even Missouri Rural Crisis Center isn't a trusted messenger in some of these communities because the Missouri Farm Bureau hates them. So we do what we can. We're more working towards it. The plague has made everything a little bit more difficult.
Gretchen, I want to mention, in addition to letters to the editor, so I read a post, and it was a fairly neutral post about what the Missouri Republicans were doing in the legislature. And there's no comments whatsoever on those, but there very well could be. And Don Corrigan says that the opinion section of the newspaper is widely read. So, I mean, that's another opportunity just to, and to my mind, if you did that, you'd want to have a relationship with people in that area so that they could actually post it, people within the community, right? Rather than somebody else. But anyway, my point is that there's opportunity for comments that people could look at. but these are things are going without any comment whatsoever as the Missouri Republicans dismantle yet another safety net or what have you. So,
And I think that groups like this one are just vitally important. I know there's a group up in St. Joseph it's not a lot of people, but it's just local people who care about progressive work and the environment. And every week they get together and they look at their local papers in St. Joseph, Missouri, and they say, is there anything in here that we need to talk about? And they will respond to every single newspaper article with a letter to the editor, or they'll go on and they'll comment and they'll find people to respond to newspaper articles and say, you got this wrong, or this is the impact, and here's why we should oppose this. And they get published constantly. So if you have a group of people, if like this group, or if you have like a working group that wants to get together and have like letter writing parties, I really recommend doing things like that. We also have Sierra Club members.
Is our 5-star letter to the editor person, I would say. But a number of us have also written.
Yeah, and if you have somebody who's really good at writing letters to the editor, obviously, Mark can only get published so often. I think in the Post-Dispatch, you're only allowed to have one letter to the editor every 60 days. So what we do as staff at Missouri sometimes is if we have an issue that got publication, we will write letters to the editor for people and say like, hey, would you send this out? Please, edit it, make it, but you have something that you can edit, because then it just feels a little bit less intimidating than looking at a blank piece of paper.
There is a Christine Gwynn, or I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She's a Republican. You may have come across her name, and she gets published letters to the editor all the time. So anyway.
But also send your letters to the editor, your friends and family, so that they click on it and they see the Post-Dispatch sees those like high click rates. If you have something that relates to an organization that's working on something, feel free to send them your letter to the editor. Sometimes they'll post it on the Facebook or in their local, newsletter.
Okay, if there are no more comments or questions for Gretchen, thank you very much for agreeing to come and speak today. It was very informative. I'm now going to turn things over to Glenn Koenen and I hope you'll stick around if you can, Gretchen. Glenn, why don't you go ahead and tell us what's going on with the legislature?
First thing, for the first time in many, many years, Missouri has money. The federal money is a lot of it is still in our account. And also the state is running about $1 billion ahead on general revenue than we were at this time last year. On top of that, we know that Washington is getting ready to shovel several $billion more towards Missouri. What that means is a lot of what you're hearing in the media about the legislators saying we can't afford things isn't true. First one, biggest one, Medicaid expansion. The worst case scenario from the state's people doing the fiscal note claimed that Missouri would see a $100 to $200 million per year cost by expanding Medicaid. That's not the history with other states. In most other states with similar systems, the state actually cleared more money from the feds so that Medicaid expansion was a net benefit to the state budget. But in Missouri, we are still clinging to the myth that we can't afford it. We can't afford $128 million, which is what the governor's budget proposed. Now, the Republicans not only did not fund the Medicaid expansion, they took that $128 million that Parson had set up, and what they did was they broke their own rules and created a new House Budget Bill 21, by the chairman last week. And they took the $128 million and divvied it up about 25 ways. Some going to school transportation costs, some going to self-directed home care. But basically, they not only did not fund Medicaid, they took that money and reallocated it. That becomes important because the governor can only spend money that's appropriated. So the legislature is in the process of setting things up so that no one will be able, the governor will not be able to appropriate money to implement the funding of Medicaid expansion. Now, the governor's been already talking out of both sides of his mouth. For example, the governor said he's going to fulfill his obligation to support Medicaid expansion. However, his budget, at a time we're looking at 250,000 or more additional family or people getting Medicaid, his budget calls for 200 fewer employees in the Department of Social Services. So even though he was saying he's going to support it, he's setting them up to fail by cutting their staff and cutting their staff support. What happens now on Medicaid? Probably nothing good is going to happen this fiscal year, because probably despite everyone wanting to go after the state in court, the program was not designed to start until July 1st. So until July 1st, until somebody who qualifies under the new expanded Medicaid rules, who did not qualify under the old rules with that 22% of poverty level income, until they have somebody who's been denied Medicaid that they're guaranteed by the state constitution to get, we're probably not going to get any people traction. Then, even though there are a lot of groups out there willing to help, the lead attorney to defend the state and to support the Constitution is Eric Schmidt, who not only is an opponent of Medicaid expansion, he wants to be the next senator from Missouri. And so expect the state, rather than aggressively trying to enforce the Constitution, to do everything they can to drag their feet and drag their heels. They can do things, for example, they could very easily make it so that nothing happens in fiscal year 22, which starts July 1st. It's possible they can make it that nothing happens in fiscal year 23 that starts July 1, 2022. So even though the people have spoken, even though it's in the state constitution, there's a very good possibility that unless we get lucky with judges, and that's going to be hard, it's probably going to have to be in federal court, because in state court, things will start out in Cole County. And there's only one Democratic judge in Cole County. And I think there's two of the judges in Cole County. Not only are they Republicans, but they need to look at a chart to remember their alphabet. They're not very enlightened jurists. And remember, Cole County, you vote as a Democrat or Republican for judge. And there are some candidates for Cole County judges who have gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars in their campaigns from special interest. The great irony here is that Medicaid expansion was backed not just by us, but by the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of employer groups, because they know that they'd rather have the state of Missouri provide medical coverage to their lower paid employees than do it themselves. And what keeps getting forgotten by the Republicans is that virtually everyone who's going to get Medicaid under Medicaid expansion is a working person, because we already cover kids to a higher income level. We already cover pregnant moms to a higher income level. The people who are going to get expanded Medicaid are the people working in minimum wage jobs, especially in rural Missouri. And that's why it's so strange that the legislature is dead set against that. If you read my blog piece earlier this week, one of the things said on the floor of the House was that we don't have to support this because it failed in 105 counties in Missouri. Keep in mind, that means that a voter in Worth County with 2,000 people, their vote counts 50 times as much as a voter in St. Louis County with almost 1 million people. But those are the sort of arguments they are throwing at us, and it's going to be a mess. We do have a couple of nice things in the state budget. We're finally going to give state employees a 2% raise, and some correction officers are going to get more than that. This still has to go through the Senate, but in the past, Missouri has passed raises for state employees. Then the governor has withheld the funds because of money shortages. This year, that shouldn't happen. Also, because we have this money coming in, they have no excuse to not fund all the parts of elementary and secondary education at the level they claim is necessary. They won't, but they have no excuse now because the money is there. Speaking of education, we have a huge problem. It looks like the House and Senate are going to support legislation to give money earmarked for public schools to charter schools or to subsidized homeschooling. Those are big issues for the Republicans. The MNEA is against it. The School Board Association is against it. The one bill only passed by one vote in the House, and yet there are so many big money people behind the scenes pushing for this. The one thing that really bothers me is that one of the provisions in a couple of the laws would say if you decide to homeschool your kids, right now that's on you. You have to take care of getting a curriculum. You have to make sure the kids are actually learning things. However, what they're talking about now is giving you enough state money originally meant for your local public school so you can hire a service that provides curriculum to homeschoolers, and that will more than pay for it. So in other words, we're now going to start subsidizing homeschoolers, even homeschoolers who are doing it for religious or other reasons that the state normally wouldn't support.
Glenn, let me ask you at this point, so for private schools, is there any money being contemplated being allocated in the future for religious private schools?
They would like
That
to do,
seems to me would be a huge issue that could be taken to the courts.
they would like to do that, but they're not there yet. That's why they're talking about scholarship funds and all these things are like 2 steps away from direct subsidies to NARICS Hall and MICDS. But that is their ultimate goal. Remember, there are some legislators in the conservative caucus and a bunch of House members who do not believe the state of Missouri should be in the public education business. That is a parental responsibility, and it's going to have to be paid for, whether they think you should have as much of a right to have that money going to Ursuline Academy as to the Melville School District. That fight is coming up. What's interesting is that a lot of those who are pushing this, the Republicans, turn around and get support from school boards and other groups in their own communities who don't seem to put A and B together, that look, your state rep, your state senator here, they're trying to chop your own organization off at the knees. That's disconnect that we heard about a few minutes ago. People don't realize that the people they're sending to Jeff City are working to take away money from all the public schools. Another thing they're talking about, which is complicated, is open transfers. In other words, you live in Melville, but you'd rather see your child go to a Lindbergh school because they're higher rated. They want to make that easier again for your kids to cross a district line. And the money that Melville would get for that child would then go to Lindbergh. That's being pushed. It doesn't have as much momentum as some of the other things, but that's coming, and that'll probably be online by next year. So that'll be another priority next year. Also in education, we did have a very small victory. Those of you who follow Missouri politics remember the name Todd Graves. Todd Graves is kind of a, we'll be polite and call him a mercenary for the Republicans. He was put up for the spot on the University of Missouri System Board of Curators, now held by David Steelman. Now, David Steelman is an arch conservative, but nobody ever doubted David Steelman's commitment to higher education. He did sometimes get upset about protest and so on, but he believed in higher education, was always trying to get more money for the Mizzou system. Todd Graves was being pushed, and he was defeated indirectly in the Senate. He passed a committee vote, but he got held up at the whole Senate level because of 2 reasons. One, all the Democrats were against him because of his past policies as a legislature. And 2, enough of the Republican senators were against him because of his ties to Eric Greitman. So that is a small victory that Mike Parson didn't get Todd Graves on the board of curators for Mizzou. There are still problems with that board. For example, UMSL and UMKC aren't getting hardly any representation at all. There's a lot of issues, but at least Todd Graves did not get on the board of curators, and that's something. The biggest fight we're probably going to see in the last couple of months is going to be over election laws. The House has already passed House Bill 133, which would change the way initiative petitions are circulated for the ballot. First of all, you need to put up $500 for the petition up front, which you would get refunded if it successfully goes in the ballot. But that's $500 a lot of grassroots groups are going to struggle to have. Another thing is, right now you need 8% of the vote total from the last gubernatorial election in 6 of the state's 8 congressional districts to get something on the ballot.
Okay, I'm coming.
They want to change that to 10% from all 8 congressional districts. You do the math, effectively you're doubling the number of signatures you're going to need to get on the ballot. Also, buried deep in the bill is some language that makes it sound like it's going to be easier for outsiders to challenge signatures. In other words, the St. Louis County Board of Elections may say, that's my signature. But somebody from a consulting group may say, well, we don't think that looks like his signature. You know, look, pull up more exemplars, do more studying, do more comparisons. That could really slow down the process. The other thing is, talking about elections, voter ID is going to come back. The Republicans are going to pass it. The question is, will the courts allow it? What we've seen in Georgia, what we've seen in other states is actually happening in Missouri just as much. It's just that the national media doesn't watch Missouri because our legislature is so out there. But we're talking about a situation where you would only be able to get an absentee ballot if you had a Missouri issued photo ID. And also where it would be harder for you to request that ballot. For example, my mom is 86 years old. She automatically gets an absentee ballot from St. Charles County for every election. I don't think that would be allowed excuse me, under these new rules. And so that could mean a huge difference in turnout, especially in things like school election and municipal elections. The other thing is, there is legislation filed, but it hasn't gotten traction, that would allow the Missouri legislature, like they're talking about, or like they tried to do last year, it would allow the legislature to overturn a vote if they suspected the voting procedures were not proper or that there was interference in the election. So in other words, the supermajority Republicans could decide, well, all these votes in state rep districts where they elected Democrats, we're challenging all of those because they don't appear to be proper. They don't appear to have been properly certified. Those election authorities didn't do the right thing. That doesn't have traction yet, but it's out there. And with other election items working their way through the building, that's something that could slide in at the last minute and give the Trump people exactly what they want. The right for a legislature to overturn an election based on perception or myth about improprieties. So let's go on to the really fun stuff, guns. House Bill 52, which would allow guns on metro and other transit systems, that has passed the House. It now looks like it's going to pass the Senate with 22 votes. If it passes the Senate, it's almost certain that Mike Parson will sign it. Senate House Bill 85, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, also referred to as Guns Everywhere. That's the bill that would allow Missouri to have less gun restrictions than the federal government has now. The example I use, and I'm not joking, is you could go out, buy a machine gun made in Missouri, mount it on the roof of your car, and drive down the street pointing that machine gun at other cars in traffic. And under the Second Amendment Preservation Act, that would
Okay.
be legal.
Yeah, I understand.
It would also make it much easier. Here we go. The Second Amendment Preservation Act would also make it less illegal to do things like sell guns in a bar, for example. It would take all restrictions off of private gun sales. In other words, you could stand outside the Missouri penitentiary and sell guns to the inmates and not have a legal obligation, even though you had reason to believe they're felons who aren't supposed to possess firearms. One minor victory on the health board situation right now. As you know, Missouri has never had a mask mandate, and Missouri has never had clear rules on how health departments handle a pandemic. The good news is that you have a lot of professional people, even in the mid-sized counties, who are trying to do the right thing. The bad news is the legislature doesn't like that. They tried to pass a bill in the Senate, which would have allowed the legislature to butt in after 15 days in most cases. So in other words, say St. Louis County said, we're enacting a mask ordinance and closing restaurants due to the pandemic. Under the bill that almost got to the floor in the Senate, the legislature for 15 days could say, okay, we don't care the pandemic is still going on. You have to end your mask mandate now. Also would allow the legislature to overturn even things by the counties like Jefferson County that have elected health boards. They would become subservient to the wishes of the legislature, and also they'd be severely limited in how long they could enact health things for. This doesn't just apply to COVID. It can also be allowed to apply to things such as restaurant inspections. Say the Jefferson County Health Board wants tighter regulations on restaurants. The state could come in and say, no, the restaurant rules for Jefferson County have to be the same as Knox County. Same as everywhere else in the state. So that got defeated, fortunately, because 8 Republicans joined with the Democrats in the Senate to vote that down because it was too restrictive even for them. But it's very possible that some sort of limitations on county health departments and health rules will be coming down, especially in May, the last couple of weeks of the legislature, when crazy things happen. Right now, we've already seen in one case, 12 bills combined into one. And that's in the first half of the session. A couple years ago, we had 27 bills combined into one on the last day of the session. So it's very possible a lot of these bad ideas that are floating out there could get a second or third life in the end. So, any questions? I know it's all depressing, but this is Missouri, and I tell people you should always try to get your friends to spend a couple hours of their time. You can watch the Missouri House and Senate in action online, especially the House. And the first thing you notice is nobody wears masks except the Democrats. The second thing you notice, what are the new fashions at Walmart? Yeah, Susan?
I know you said that the bill to limit what local health departments could do by being limited by the state didn't pass, but my understanding is that a bill is going to pass that would allow county councils to challenge or stop the decisions that health departments are making. That's a big deal in St. Louis County right now.
And that one has more legs, but I actually think they won't stop there. I think they're going to go like they have on so many other things. The state is going to preempt local control. I really think that vote in the Senate is an aberration. I think by the time they get to the end of the session, they'll figure out a way to make it palatable enough to get the votes they need and to get it in. And it's obvious we do not have a strong advocate for public health in Mike Parson. If you saw the pictures about 2 weeks ago, he went to a rodeo. Mike Parson with 10,000 people, maybe 1 or 2 masks in the place. Middle of a pandemic.
Well, the whole issue of local control runs beyond public health. I mean, it's impacted gun laws in terms of the cities, and it also is going to be impacting and has impacted education. I know, I'm active in the League of Women Voters, and we have a group of people who are concerned about curriculum that's being developed right now. And they've done some research and discovered that the state legislature has the final say on curriculum in this state, which is outrageous. So they are actually going to start a project to overturn that legislation that I guess it got passed in 2014. I wish them luck.
Ross has a question.
Yes, Glenn, great job as always. Thank you so much. I missed the bill number on the right of the legislature to overturn an election based on perception.
That is in several, it's part of several bills. The bill that's to watch though is House Bill 133.
Okay.
That's the omnibus election bill, which also includes initiative petitions and so on. That's where I think it's going to wind up. Right now, it's in separate measures, but again, they're already combining things, putting things together. The only good thing is this is not an election year. So that means that nobody's going to need to have their bill passed so they can put it on their, on their mailer. Next year, we're going to see a lot more of this, a lot more craziness and a lot more combined bills so that more people can claim they got something passed.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Don.
You're still muted, Don.
Hold on, let me,
I always enjoy your report because it brings us back to reality. Okay. and I think the question and or challenge, I mean, we have an incredible amount of work to do. And we can't be Pollyannish about this. We've got to have a grassroots effort to educate. I mean, this is a representative democracy. Okay. So despite all of our best intentions, and even if we win the majority state vote, we have this grassroots work that we have to do to educate the electorate in rural as well as urban areas to the logic of doing smart things. And we have to look for alliances, the Chamber of Commerce to the extent possible, to get this job done. And we've got to be smarter and more strategic in how we do our work here, because we're in a downward slide. And the Bob Clarks of Clayco and the Michael Nydorfs have raised the red flags, but these guys in Jeff City don't pay attention to it because they don't have to.
Well, this year we've seen a couple of bills, including Medicaid expansion, that was supported by the State Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that were shot down. And I think what we have to do is keep reminding people what their legislators are saying and voting on. Most of the committee hearings now are available online. You can watch the session, and they say incredibly dumb, racist, nasty stuff on the floor of the House. They say things in committee which have no basis in reality. The problem is nobody ever holds them accountable for it. And I've tried to get the Post-Dispatch and others to just look at some of the things said on the floor of the House that are so out there. Like the fact that I mentioned, the one legislator said, well, 105 counties voted against Medicaid expansion, therefore it didn't pass. When it's not counties, it's people that vote. Somebody else said, it was Justin Hill, the guy who skipped his own swearing in to be in the Capitol on January 6th. He said he was proud to stand against the will of the people. Now, Channel 4 ran that on the news, and it did get play in some places, but it got more play in the national media than where we needed it to get play in the local media. It was one TV station and one two-line mention in the Post.
You said he was proud to stand against the rural people?
Against the
Will of the people.
Oh, the will of the people, sorry.
And he said that, and then he repeated it. If I doubt if a lot of the people in Wentzville thought they were voting for somebody who was going to skip their swearing in to go to Washington and riot, and then come back and tell them, I'm proud to stand against the will of the people. That's not what I want in a representative, no matter what party they're from. But again, it's exposing people to what their elected officials are doing in their name and what they're saying, what they're doing. The problem is we get into education, and the Republicans, remember how many times they changed the foundation formula? Remember how many times they cut funding and trimmed the DSEC program in the city? And they still will not give control of city schools back to city residents. Same with the Normandy board now. That Normandy board is having all sorts of issues.
Glenn, the city voters do have control over our school board at the moment.
You got rid of the three unelecteds?
Yeah, that was in 2019.
Okay. I know Normandy still has the control board.
Right, Normandy has problems.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it sounds like the Chamber of Commerce, that's an interesting angle there in terms of tension between the Republican legislature and what the Chamber of Commerce actually recognizes are their interests.
Let me make a comment there. You know, the business community is reorganized under this greater STL Inc. And the Taylor family is really driving the bus there, as I understand it. Okay. Enterprise. And so just so how incestuous this all is, the public affairs VP for Enterprise is Ann Wagner's husband.
Yeah.
So, you know, and here's another irony. The founder of Worldwide Technologies, David, what's his last name?
Stewart.
Dave Stewart. He's along with Michael Neidorff, one of the major supporters of the Urban League. Okay. Which is a fantastic organization and has really helped St. Louis get through this pandemic. But Dave Stewart also gave $730,000 to Jim Lemke's PAC that supports Andrew Koenig and Bill Eigel, who are the two proponents of much of what Glenn has just talked about.
Conservative caucus in the Senate, yes.
I mean, it's just crazy because we are shooting ourselves in the foot all over the place.
Yes, the conservative caucus in the Senate now has grown with Mike Moon joining them. But you have Koenig, Eigel, Onder, Cindy Laughlin, and Mike Moon are the worst of the worst, with Andrew Koenig are the worst of the worst. And they believe that no government is good government. They believe taxes should always be lower. But at the same time, they don't want to give up services. One of the House members, for example, stood up on the floor a couple of weeks ago. And in Missouri, the minimum pay for a school teacher is only $25,000. There has been a move for several years to raise it to $30,000. There are a couple of school districts that still don't pay $30,000 for a starting full-time teacher. And to help them be able to do that, there was talk about some quiet funds they could apply for within the DESE system. But one of them said, well, when I was growing up, we got by on $10,000 a year. That's all my family needed to keep 4 kids in clothes and keep a car on the road. Now, if that's your mindset, the legislature, by the way, did not accept an amendment when they were debating Medicaid expansion. They did not accept an amendment from a Democrat that would have said that the legislators would not get medical coverage as part of their employment package until Medicaid was expanded. For some reason, they voted it down. They wanted to make sure they kept their insurance, even if other people didn't get coverage. Any other questions? Last point I want to make is what's coming up late this year, and that's the census. We are already hearing stories that the Republicans are loading for bear. We know the census numbers are going to be horrible. We know they're going to be horrifically inaccurate in the city of St. Louis and in many of the rural areas. Yet there's still going to be what's going to have to be used for House and Senate seats in congressional districts. We're hearing stories, rumblings out of Jeff City and other places that the Republicans want to reduce the number of Democrats in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate. They think there's too many of us already. And for example, in the city, if the city gets a bad undercount, the city could lose a state rep that way. And that seat would effectively go to St. Charles County or Lincoln County or another area that's more Republican. And so that's going to be a big fight, and it's going to really get into the weeds on data integrity and what was done to ensure that the counts are accurate. Remember, for a long time in Missouri, Missouri was one of the last states to go to one man, one vote. For a long time in Missouri, the rural areas had a lot more representation per capita than the urban areas. And there are people in Jeff City today who think that's a great thing. Remember that legislator who said, well, Medicaid expansion didn't pass because it failed in 105 counties. The other year, they talked about having being able to pass a bill by having county commissions and judges and councils when a majority of the 115 county councils or county commissions pass something, it could become law. That was one of the ways they were trying to get some gun control legislation, gun uncontrolled legislation through, because they knew they could get 60 or 70 rural counties that only had 30% of the state's population to back it. And it's going to be a lot of weird stuff. In the census, there's going to be a big battle, and it's going to come up if the census sticks to their timetable. They will not release numbers until September 30th. And yet those numbers will have to be in place to the state, and the state will have to draw district lines before filing opens for House and Senate races at the beginning of February. That's not a lot of time, even with computers, especially for the challengers, because you know the Republicans have computers working right now. Because we lost this neutral state demographer we had under Clean Missouri, the process this time is going to be even more political than it was in 2012. So it's going to be a mess, folks, and keep an eye on that. Keep a lookout for it, and when those numbers come out, expect a big fight, because there are Republicans who don't want us to have as many seats as we have right now.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Good presentation. We have some comments in the chat from Ray Cummings, who joined us today. And you can see those, that there was an endorsement. And Ray, if you want to come online and speak, please feel free to do so. But the chat is that this, well, go ahead. Ray, you want to speak on what you posted here? Hold on a second. Let me make sure you're unmuted here. Hold on one second here.
He's unmuted.
I know, I'm trying to.
I'm unmuted now, aren't I?
Yeah, you're fine now, Ray. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, Steve? Everybody else on this Zoom call. Sorry for my tardiness, but I'm at dialysis. I was coming in and out. I wanted everyone to know that Local 420, as well as the St. Louis Labor Council, have endorsed those 3 candidates that I had in the chat. We use primarily two criteria: experience and who's got skin in the game. Both David Meredith, who is the brother to Peter Meredith, state rep, and Matt Davis have children in the St. Louis Public Schools. And we are presently up against heavily financed candidates by a group known as the Opportunity Trust. I don't know how many of you know about that group, but they are a group that is a not-for-profit that is heavily financed by out-of-town multimillionaires. And their goal is to bring charter schools to as many school districts in the state of Missouri as possible. They have they got about $40 million over there. They've got a line item in House Bill 2, I think it is, that's to some organization that is a not-for-profit that's going to reimagine and redesign schools. Well, they already got 40 million. They already got a playbook. Why are they asking for scarce taxpayer dollars at this particular time in order to do that? It's just to add more credibility to them and what they're trying to do. They're primarily responsible, the Opportunity Trust, for that gentleman named Marcus Robinson that is at Normandy, who is unqualified, uncertified. The only thing he's certified to do is teach as a substitute. But he makes as much money in Normandy with one high school as Dr. Adams makes in the city of St. Louis. And I'm here to tell you that guy is not even qualified to carry Dr. Adams' briefcase. But he was put in place out of work, some of the work that was done by the Opportunity Trust, where in fact they gave $500,000 to the Normandy School District. They took some of their elected board members to Indianapolis, wined and dined them at five-star restaurants and all the rest of that. One of the gentlemen on the board of their directors is a gentleman by the name of, I believe his name is Kemper. He's the CEO of Commerce Bank. He was able to get one of his employees at Commerce Bank, I think she works in public relations or something like that, appointed to head the Normandy School Board. And she is the one that spearheaded the process to bring this guy, Marcus Robinson, in, who has been run out of town every other place where he's been, primarily because of some financial discrepancies and stuff like that. I had a conversation with the Commissioner of Education at DESE this past week. And among some of the things I talked to her about that. And I explained how this guy couldn't be the superintendent in a district, any other district in the city of St. Louis, in the state of Missouri, even if they only had a one-room schoolhouse. But you can take a character like that and try to say just because he's black and install him in a predominantly African-American district. And I think it's just a travesty. So those are our candidates, and I wanted to share that information so that people understand what's going on with this Opportunity Trust. Susan.
I have a question. Ray, I was wondering if Local 420 had made an endorsement in the mayor's race.
No, we did not.
Okay.
We left the mayor's race open as our affiliate, labor brothers and sisters at the Greater St. Louis Labor Council, primarily because with labor issues, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between those two candidates. From the school, from our point of view at Local 420, once both of them recognized the moratorium that we brought to town, on before we open up any more new schools in the city of St. Louis. We need to come up with a plan. So we're leaving it open for our members to vote their conscience.
One of the things that I've become concerned about in just the last few days, there's been a flyer that has been sent citywide that connects one of the mayoral candidates, Tashora Jones, with 3 of the school board candidates. And she is trying to get them all 4, those 3 other candidates elected with her. And I've heard that if she is elected mayor, which she probably will be, that she's going to appoint someone who works in her office, Adam Lane, to replace her as treasurer, so that he would have to leave the school board and she would get to appoint a 4th person. And that is, if she's elected mayor and the 3 candidates that she's connected to her campaign are also elected and she gets to appoint a 4th candidate, she will in effect have undue influence or I don't know what else to call it really, over the Board of Education. And the last time we had that kind of political interference with the Board of Education in the city, it didn't end well.
Yeah.
Let me say this, Susan. I've heard that also, but so that we're clear, that flyer, that citywide mailer, they sent out a couple of citywide mailers, and the subject of the flyer, kind of the mark, what was on the marquee on the flyer is Black Women for Leadership, and they had Tashara on there and these other 3 ladies. You don't have to state the obvious, especially in the environment that we're in now. It's my belief that those candidates that are also being backed by the Opportunity Trust and We Power actually tried to attach themselves to the coattail of Tashara. Because for me, as a political person that's been working at this stuff for a while, that flyer could have a negative backlash on Tashara. And it was put out by a young guy by the name of J.P. Johnson that used to be a guy that was trying to be a minion to Francis Slade, much like Jeffrey Boyd. So I just don't know what's going on. Sometimes this political stuff, you don't know who's who until you kind of the smoke clears and you sort out the pieces.
Well,
But right now,
I know that J.P. Johnson ran for school board himself a couple of elections back. And when I interviewed him, I found out he was a strong supporter of charter schools again. So I'm very concerned about those flyers and the potential impact of those women winning the elections.
and I too share those concerns. We should be concerned about who is the right person. Doesn't matter what the color is. We want the right person in the right position, the person that based on their experience and their expertise that they're going to execute. That's what we're looking for.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak for a few minutes.
Absolutely. Glad you came on today, Ray.
If anybody has any other questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. I'm presently writing a letter to all of the representatives and the senators in Jefferson City to let them know about House Bill 2 that is earmarking $2 million that eventually will be going to the Opportunity Trust. And also letting them know exactly who these people are. These are carpetbagger, snake oil salesmen that come to town telling you they can cure all your ills, and they have no track record of success anywhere, and they're always a bunch of unqualified, uncertified charlatans that are out there selling those wares. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ray, we'll do what we can to publicize this thing on social media. You know what you posted to the chat. Susan?
For those of you who don't know, Ray is the president of Local 420, the St. Louis Teachers Union.
Okay. Thank you again, Ray.
All right, thank you.
So Ross has posted in the chat, has reminded us that the Post-Dispatch has a voter's guide. I guess that's already out now. And there it is. I haven't done my homework on these.
It's also available online on their website.
Right. So does anybody have anything they want to say about some of the ballot measures, whether they're sewer or other things? Yeah, Glenn.
MSD on their bond issue is or their rate case is basically a heads we win, tails you lose situation.
Yeah.
They've already said that if we do not vote for that, they will go ahead and impose it as part of the court order for them to clean up the water. So vote your conscience on that one, knowing it's not going to make much difference. And some of the other MSD provisions have a lot of us shaking our heads because they're technical and they look small. But if you've ever followed Tom Sullivan and his crusade against government waste, Tom Sullivan's nervous about most of those propositions. And if Tom Sullivan is nervous, I'm unhappy.
Yeah, I agree with Glenn on that. Some of the provisions there, I guess there are 5 provisions that the sewer district wants passed, and I'm going to vote no on most of them.
The voter's guide has a pretty good description. They have a summary of those. I posted the URL in the chat where you can look that up. It's listed, although it will appear on the ballot in both St. Louis City and County. It's listed under the category of St. Louis County in their voter's guide. There are 5 numbered propositions, and then proposition Y is the bond issue. And I would like to note, I think that that the consent decree that was signed was a necessity, that the upgrades to the system were necessary in order to prevent us from sending our raw sewage into the rivers here. And that's just a basic need to prevent water pollution.
So what do we need to vote on? What is our vote on there, Ross? What's the?
Well, the bond issue is proposition Y, but the others, I think,
and that's a yes in your view. Then that would be a yes.
Well, it depends on whether you want to have bonds to pay for that. I mean, interest rates are going up right now. Eventually, they're going to exceed in the inflation rate. Right now, they probably will not for some time. So it's just a question of whether you want to pay more now or less in the long run, because you're not going to pay for these for the interest on these bonds. That's only proposition Y. There are several other propositions. A lot of those are just very basic things that clarify or approve of very common sense rules. But I think in some cases they can be contested. Personally, I'm planning to probably vote for all of these propositions, just to get that out there, that some of you may support some of these. I think that number 1 is particularly confusing. I think that it's, it would update employment discrimination rules so that gender, sexual orientation, familial status and ancestry, national origin would be included, as well as race, creed, color, religion, and so forth. There's one rule that I don't understand. The updates would state no two trustees appointed from the city or county could be a member of the same political party. Right now it says they can't be affiliated with that party. It's just a small change in the wording, but it's a little confusing. I guess that means periodic appointments being made would require representation from different parties. If anybody
I think it means that the city mayor could not fill 2 slots with 2 Democrats. That's the way I read it. The problem is in the city, there aren't that many Republicans, and it could get interesting. It could mean that some good people who are willing to serve on that board don't get on.
I see. Thanks, Glenn.
Ross, did I see where, I had heard the Post-Dispatch was voting no on 1 and 2 and supporting the others. Was there anything in what you saw that indicated that? Don't quote me on that, folks.
I have not seen an editorial by the Post-Dispatch on these yet. Maybe it was, I haven't read today's paper yet. Maybe it was in today.
Okay. All righty. Anything else? I'd like the board members to just stay for one minute after the others leave. Do we have anything else? If not, let's have a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, board members, just stay on for a moment, and Ross and Ray and Glenn, thank you for coming.